What if a small, determined army could turn back a larger invading force with cunning moves and relentless pressure? In Donetsk's grueling battles, Ukrainian forces delivered two stunning lessons that no one saw coming. The focus was the Pocrovsk junction, where Russian troops had claimed significant ground, firing tanks and setting up strongholds in what seemed like an unstoppable advance. Yet, beneath the smoke and thunder of artillery, something far more cunning was unfolding. At the start of the month, Ukraine faced a harsh reality, losing around 5 square kilometers near Pocrovsk. Russian troops pushed forward through narrow infiltrations, sneaking amidst tree lines, building trenches, command posts, and weapons caches. The defenders were battered, their positions under severe strain. But Ukrainian commanders refused to surrender this lost land. Led by Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrsky, they crafted a plan designed not to meet brute force head-on but to unravel the enemy from within. In Pokrovsk, Ukraine's immediate goal was clear: choke off the enemy's flanks and trap their lines of retreat under a relentless barrage. Using unmanned aerial drones to spot Russian supply trucks in the rear, Ukrainian artillery and rocket systems struck intermittently but precisely. The attack wasn't a thunderous one-time strike but a series of waves, carefully timed and coordinated with kamikaze-style drones and rocket barrages, turning the Russian convoys into easy prey. Each convoy carrying tanks became a marked target for HIMARS rocket systems. It was a nightmare descending on the enemy forces, whose losses rose daily above 100 men and machines. Step by step, Ukrainian troops reclaimed territory, over 26 square kilometers, more than twice the size lost. These weren't just open fields; strategic hills, critical roadways, and observation points fell back into Ukrainian hands. The advantage wasn't just about land but about vision and control, crucial for defending against future assaults. The breakthrough wasn't explosive or sudden. Instead, it was a carefully choreographed dance of small, rapid maneuvers where enemy advances looked like jagged teeth pressing into the map, only to be slowly squeezed and narrowed from the sides. Drones patrolled day and night, pinpointing movement for precision strikes. Firepower broke into short, intense bursts, striking the enemy the moment they stirred. Rescue vehicles and reinforcements became targets too, disrupting the enemy's rhythm rather than attempting outright destruction. Ground forces moved in quick jumps, sweeping buildings and trench lines in moments of silence between attacks. Instead of holding fixed positions, troops set up flexible patrol zones, ready to fall back and prevent the enemy from reclaiming lost ground on the same day. Mines and explosives were cleared swiftly as night fell, securing the line. Syrsky highlighted two key lessons from this clash. First, while Russian troops found early success infiltrating thin, narrow lines under cover of darkness, these advances became vulnerable by daylight, caught in calculated Ukrainian fire. Second, the speed of Ukrainian counteractions was crucial, with losses recovered within hours. The defense remained fluid and proactive. Their motto: concentrate efforts where it mattered without overextending, a balance that held strong in Pokrovsk. Nearby, in Derilia, the battle repeated with similar intensity. Russian forces seized about 13.5 square kilometers with rapid infiltrations, forming a pocket that controlled vital roadways and wooded strips. Ukrainian forces responded with equal resolve, reclaiming 25.5 square kilometers, almost doubling what was lost. This wasn't just territory, it was control over key elevations and supply routes. The pocket was squeezed from two sides, with carefully arranged fire that cut off enemy retreat. As before, cleared areas were secured and swept for potential threats. Throughout the month, Ukraine's offensive efforts liberated over 58 square kilometers across these critical fronts. Commander Syrsky's confirmed figures showed the reclaimed land included small settlements, crossroads, water crossings, and ridges, terrain vital for both defense and observation. The new front line gave Ukrainian troops better sight and fire control in ongoing battles. Even as Russian attacks continued relentlessly, more than 350 recorded in the Pokrovsk direction alone, their gains failed to deepen. Instead, relentless Ukrainian defense broke the enemy's momentum, fracturing large offensives into smaller, manageable attacks. Russian attempts to set up new machine gun nests and trenches were quickly countered, their preparations detected by persistent drone reconnaissance. Fire rained down often before dawn, forcing rapid Russian withdrawals. Every rescue operation faltered under precise follow-up strikes, and positions were abandoned by nightfall. The rhythm here was fierce and unyielding, daily pressure met with swift counteraction, ground gained and regained, territory firmly held. In early September, Ukrainian forces went on the offensive, clearing two villages, Novoytne and Udakne, in intense, focused clashes. Using combined arms, small armored units with infantry supported by artillery and drones, they dismantled enemy positions block by block. Reinforcements caught under drone watch never reached the front, sealing the gains. This gripping saga shows something remarkable, not just stubborn defense, but strategic mastery under fire. Ukraine didn't just hold its lines, it seized momentum, turning fleeting Russian advances into ruins, rewriting the battlefield story with relentless force and precision. How long can such a dynamic balance hold? The answer may change everything in this conflict's next chapters. Imagine a relentless siege where every supply line pulses with danger. How do you break the invaders' hold under such suffocating fire? For weeks, the Russian army counted on their armored convoys to shuttle tanks and reinforcements into a critical zone near Pocrovsk. But what if those convoys never reached their destination? In this chapter of the brutal conflict, Ukrainian forces unleashed a punishing rhythm of attacks that left the enemy convoys trapped in a deadly dance. Every day, between 1 and 3 Russian supply convoys, burdened with main battle tanks, became prime targets for devastating strikes by HIMARS missile systems. The air itself seemed charged with tension, as kamikaze-style UAVs swarmed through the skies like specters of destruction. These relentless drones cast a forbidding shadow, turning supply routes into death traps that Russian forces dared no longer traverse. The toll was staggering. The Russian army suffered daily casualties surpassing 100 soldiers just in this sector. Each nightfall wiped the slate clean as Ukrainian troops advanced methodically, clearing enemy positions one by one. With these continuous blows, the fight blurred into a relentless game of attrition rather than isolated battles. After days of crushing counterattacks, Ukraine announced a stunning reversal. An area larger than 26 square kilometers around Pokrovsk was reclaimed. Shockingly, this was more than double the territory they had lost during the initial advances by the enemy. What made this victory monumental wasn't just the size of the land recovered, but the strategic value of the terrain, small hills, vital road junctions, and steep ridges ideal for surveillance and defense. Controlling these vantage points allowed Ukrainian defenders to anticipate assaults, directing precise fire zones that crippled the enemy's pushes before they could gather momentum. This dramatic turnaround was not the product of a massive all-at-once offensive. Instead, it unfolded through a series of swift, surgical strikes, small units maneuvering fluidly to isolate and squeeze Russian footholds that jutted like jagged teeth on a map. Drone reconnaissance never ceased, day blurring into night, tracking every movement with laser focus. Each evening, Ukrainian commanders compiled precise target lists for the coming day. The firepower was delivered in short, violent bursts, rather than prolonged barrages. Whenever a Russian vehicle stirred or reinforcements tried to steam forward, the response tightened instantly, choking off any chance of consolidation. Rescue convoys might think they could sneak through under cover of darkness, but they too were hunted relentlessly. Rather than aiming for swift annihilation, the Ukrainian strategy disrupted the enemy's tempo, extinguishing pressure before a full-scale threat could develop. Ground troops moved quickly, seizing buildings and trench lines immediately after artillery fell silent, never giving occupiers time to regroup. Instead of static fortifications, they created flexible defense pockets, ready to fall back and reorganize, constantly denying the invader any permanent hold. What emerges from this brutal dance is a picture of control restored against all odds. How long could the Russian forces sustain their grip when supply convoys became death sentences? Could they withstand a foe that strikes like a storm, then vanishes before the enemy's fury can answer? The answer would soon become clear, but one thing was certain: in Pokrovsk, the tide had turned. The oppressive gloom that hung over the battlefields was lifting, replaced by a sharp new edge of hope crafted in fire, shadows, and unyielding resolve. When the dust settled on the relentless clashes, it became clear: more than 350 Russian adversarial attempts were thwarted in just 1 month along the Pocrovsk front. Despite the unyielding pressure, these strikes, scattered across wide swaths, failed to deliver decisive gains. Small units and supply convoys launched repeated raids, trying desperately to carve out footholds, machine gun nests, mortar lines, makeshift trenches creeping forward within the shadowy gray zone. Yet, their efforts were doomed from the start. Night fell heavy with tension. Ukrainian drones hummed quietly in the cold sky, eyes slicing through the darkness. They tracked every Russian move like a predator stalking its prey, silently feeding coordinates for precise strikes. Just before dawn, artillery fire rained down, shattering those fragile pockets before they could solidify. Attempts to reinforce these positions were ambushed mid-route, forcing enemy forces to abandon ground time and again. The gray zone's expansion never anchored itself, successive incursions were uprooted before they could mature. This unyielding pressure was relentless, but it could never outpace the swift, adaptive Ukrainian defense. Each day, the front line seemed to breathe anew. Logistics shifted dynamically, responding instantly to the ebb and flow of battle. The enemy's momentum was shattered again and again, their gains evaporating with the morning mist. Then came early September, a turning point. The 425th Assault Regiment, nicknamed Skala among the troops, went on the offensive. They struck decisively, clearing two strategic villages, Novoykn and Udakn, from enemy hands. These weren't mere skirmishes but fierce, lightning-fast engagements within the settlements. Small armored squads worked in tight coordination with infantry, hitting enemy checkpoints at village entrances like a hammer and chisel. Key structures fell quickly, seized through coordinated raids backed by relentless artillery and unmanned aerial vehicle support sweeping overhead. The operation's tempo was fierce but precise, clearing block by block, not stretching resources thin street by street. The pace left no chance for prolonged enemy resistance. As the ceasefire briefly held, any reinforcements attempting to slide in from the rear were spotted and harassed by drone surveillance. Swift strikes delayed their arrival, cementing the gains scored on that first day. The footholds captured solidified into strongholds. The recapture of these villages wasn't just symbolic, it tightened the security ring around vital supply routes, making movement safer and more predictable for Ukrainian forces. The enemy's hope of breaking through was fading, caught in a relentless cycle of pressure and counterattack. Could any force withstand such a crushing pattern? How long before this unbroken chain of defense fractures the enemies will completely? The answer hovered just beyond the horizon, but one thing was clear, this was more than defense, it was a campaign of revival, precision, and unyielding resilience. Previously, we saw how Russian forces tried to push forward rapidly but were quickly bogged down by minefields, drone swarms, and relentless artillery strikes. The narrow passages limited armored movement, making it harder to establish lasting fire superiority. Engineering units suffered early losses, breaking the momentum before it could build. Now, imagine this, the very vehicles meant to carry reinforcements and recover damaged tanks suddenly found themselves in the crosshairs. As attack waves tried to advance, the second wave shattered into fragments without making progress. The Russian plan to flood the front with a single massive strike didn't unfold as imagined. Instead, the offensives fractured into smaller attacks, perfect for Ukraine's defenders to pick apart. Small pockets of Russian troops were trapped, struggling to hold what little ground they grabbed. None of these gains could solidify into a firm foothold. The enemy's strategy shifted to spreading pressure thinly across the line, trying to exhaust Ukrainian forces without breaking through. But this diluted effort played right into the defenders' hands. As Russian armored and motorized units pressed the flanks, their goal was clear: encircle Pocrovsk and sever its supply routes. Every dirt road, tiny bridge, and culvert became a critical lifeline, or a lethal choke point. Kiev's forces prioritized targeting these small but crucial crossings with indirect fire, destroying light bridging gear and maintenance towers. Sabotage crews struck stealthily in precise 24-hour windows, closing roads for mere hours. But even these fleeting disruptions slowed the Russian assault's rhythm dramatically. Trapped infantry waves faced exposure, raising the threat of retreat and stalling their advance just enough for Ukrainian counterattacks to strike. Despite repeated attempts, Russian forces failed to crack these bottlenecks. The vital intersections on the front line held firm, day after day. Yet, this doesn't mean the Russians have given up hope in the Donetsk region. Troop concentrations and equipment loads reveal that their grand plan, pushing towards the critical Pocrovsk-Slovensk triangle, is alive and well. Railcars clattered with reinforcements. Convoys shuffled heavy vehicles forward. Artillery batteries shifted into place. Still, no element of this grand design came together to deliver a decisive breakthrough. Every move encountered stiff resistance, and momentum remained elusive. What happens when an operation's blueprint is as shattered as its front line? Can a force rebuild after each failed push? Or will the defenders continue to slice away at every Russian attempt to gain ground? The next moves will reveal whether the tide truly turns or grinds to a bloodied standstill. In the heat of battle, when overwhelming forces close in, the crucial element is not sheer numbers, but rhythm, precision timing that dictates the flow of conflict. Around Pocrovsk, this invisible tempo shaped every move. Earlier, medium-range strikes slowed enemy advances. Now, fresh targets emerged, supply depots, transfer hubs, repair zones, and temporary staging areas became chess pieces in this deadly game. Explosions tore through these vital points. The sharp crackle of GMLRS rockets echoed as warehouses ignited, sending plumes of black smoke into the sky. Mini UAVs darted forward like relentless scouts, capturing every fiery blast and secondary explosion from above. Instead of firing repeatedly at the same spots, fire controllers switched swiftly to the next critical node. This constant shifting was calculated to keep the enemy scrambling, to delay their fragile supply lines from healing. Each disruption at the rear unfolded like a ripple, draining momentum at the front lines that very day. When the initial assault weakened, the follow-up waves hesitated, advancing in scattered fits rather than a united push. Day after day, this cycle repeated, a grinding game of attrition that wore down the attacker's spirit and stalled their efforts. Electronic warfare layered the battlefield with a silent but fierce struggle. GPS jamming and communication blackouts buzzed around both sides like unseen ghosts. Yet Ukrainian forces bounced back quickly, restoring their targeting streams even after brief silences. Dawn raids saw drones flying low, hugging the terrain to dodge detection. Eyes piercing the enemy's shadows. To counter the enemy's swarm of tactical UAVs, Ukrainian defenders unleashed close-range jammers and hunter drones, machines built to track and silence their airborne opponents. This invisible tug-of-war shifted daily, but on average, reconnaissance remained solid, preventing enemy probes from expanding into bigger breaches. Radars and anti-aircraft systems weren't deployed en masse but carefully timed, like guards stationed only where and when they were needed. Information flowed steadily. Imagery guided artillery, ensuring each rocket and shell hit exactly where it counted. This continuous surveillance crushed attempts by enemy forces to carve out new footholds. Electronic warfare, quiet yet decisive, shaped the real impact of artillery far more than any loud explosion on the ground. Meanwhile, beyond gunfire and drones, civilian life trudged on. The weight of daily survival pressed heavily, influencing every command, every strategy. The battle wasn't just fought with weapons, it was waged within minds juggling the chaos of war and the fragile thread of normal life. What happens when war is no longer just a clash of armies, but a relentless game of timing, technology, and nerves? How does the pulse of battle control not just territory, but the fate of those caught within? The answer lies in the dance of disruption and recovery, one that has turned the tide in places like Pokrovsk, shaking the enemy from their grip, one carefully timed strike at a time. In the fierce struggle over Pocrovsk, every day tells a story of survival, not just on the battlefield, but also in the towns that line the front line. Life in these settlements faces constant interruptions. The hum of electricity wavers. Water supplies falter. Communications flicker in and out like distant echoes. Yet, despite these challenges, a quiet resilience takes hold. Alarm cycles stretch longer. Evacuation windows open more frequently. Local leaders roll out adaptive plans to secure fragile neighborhoods, creating rapid response teams dedicated to patching broken infrastructure. Electricity is restored, water flows are fixed, and communication lines buzz back to life, sometimes within mere hours. This invisible battle, fought far from the gunfire, feeds a crucial lifeline. Troops on the front line draw strength from knowing their homes can still breathe, that their families are not swallowed by chaos. The front's heartbeat slows when the city hums steadily. Commanders meticulously synchronize combat plans with logistics, maintaining this delicate balance. lose that, and even the smallest victories risk fading into political noise, barely noticed beyond the front lines. Pocrovsk's landscape shapes every decision. Open fields stretch wide, dotted with resilient tree lines and small rises in the terrain. Narrow roads lace the area, allowing swift resupplies but exposing convoys to deadly observation. Each ridge becomes a vantage point, a deadly gift. Under cover of night, thermal imaging casts an unforgiving glare across these heights. An attacker caught in the sights pays a steep price. Minefields shape the battlefield too, forcing enemy forces toward flanks where defenders lie in wait. These defenders have mastered the art of creating fire pockets, zones where attackers become trapped, spending precious time and resources scratching for escape. When reinforcements rush to save them, they too become targets, grinding down successive waves until the initial invasion fractures into smaller, disjointed pushes. For the defenders, this fracture translates into a manageable, controlled rhythm. Broad enemy assaults dissolve into multiple failed probes. The terrain becomes an ally, narrowing wide arrows of attack into predictable, less dangerous stabs. But the struggle is far from over. The future of Pocrovsk hinges on two looming challenges. First, the shifting weather threatens to alter the very ground beneath armored vehicles. Rain and mud will slow them down. Paths will narrow, and culverts once overlooked become bottlenecks critical to movement. The rains coming will be an unseen enemy, reshaping tactics quietly but decisively. Second, vital supply routes and military depots will remain under constant pressure. If this strain grows heavier, it could disrupt the rhythm of attacks on the front, sending shockwaves through the entire battle. In this constant dance of destruction and renewal, the silent war beneath the storm grows ever more important. And, as the muddy season creeps closer, will Pocrovsk's defenders hold their fragile balance? Or will the rains open the door for the enemy's relentless push? The answer lies just beyond the horizon, where every raindrop whispers a new threat. The battlefield rhythm in Pocrovsk is finely tuned. But two looming challenges threaten to upset this balance. First, as the rainy season arrives, muddy terrain and swollen culverts will narrow the already tight passages. Armored vehicles will struggle, and rapid mobility could grind to a desperate halt. This makes the chain of UAVs and artillery strikes all the more crucial. Every narrow window of opportunity might decide the fate of entire missions. Second, relentless pressure continues against supply depots and transfer points deep behind the lines. Should this pressure intensify, the front might once again fall into chaos, breaking the hard-earned cadence of defense. The opposing forces are not giving up, they are probing for new routes and launching attacks at unexpected times, hoping to find a weak spot in the rhythm. Yet, if the defenders keep their reconnaissance sharp and their firepower coordinated, these enemy advances will remain fleeting. Like bubbles forming and popping before they can grow, every attempted breakthrough is smothered before it becomes permanent. The front line will hold its ground, closing ranks instead of opening doors. Numbers on the ground tell a clear story. In a single month, over 58 square kilometers were reclaimed across Pocrovsk and Derilia, territory far beyond mere fields, including critical road junctions, water crossings, and strategic ridges. These gains are not flukes but represent a consistent pattern. Russian efforts to flank, sever supply lines, and exploit tight fronts have met with unyielding resistance. Dashed repeatedly by the unforgiving terrain and precise fire zones. As long as these conditions stand, the true force shaping Pocrovsk's fate won't be a massive, headline-grabbing assault. Instead, it will be a relentless sequence of swift, surgical counterattacks. Each small strike chips away at the invader's foothold, weaving a tapestry of defense that enemy commanders dread. But here's the twist that will shock many: what if this seemingly endless cat-and-mouse game is no accident? What if the defenders are not just reacting, but carefully orchestrating every move to drain the enemy's strength and confidence? Could this patient, calculated pressure be the hidden key to tipping the balance once and for all? Only time will tell if the closing window in Pocrovsk seals the fate of the invasion, or cracks open a new chapter altogether. The eyes of the world remain fixed, waiting for what comes next in this high-stakes chess match where every square kilometer won means more than just ground won, it means control of the future. In the previous segment, we learned about the Ukrainian forces' tactical brilliance, focusing on disrupting enemy movements rather than relying on overwhelming firepower. As they monitored vehicles and responded quickly, they regained significant territory, emphasizing control over the battlefield. Now, let's dive into the thrilling developments on the front lines. As the dust settled from the artillery barrage, Ukrainian troops executed swift assaults on enemy strongholds. They coordinated rapid entries into strategic buildings and dugouts, taking advantage of the brief moments of silence following fire. Instead of remaining static, they implemented adaptive patrols and established defensive zones that were prepared to retreat if needed. This proactive strategy significantly diminished the Russian forces' potential to reclaim lost ground on that very day. After these intense operations, the Ukrainian troops initiated sweeping maneuvers to clear mines and improvised explosive devices, ensuring the secured areas were safe throughout the frigid night. Commander Alexander Syrski elaborated on two critical observations regarding their tactics. First, he noted how Russian units had made significant penetrations into narrow zones initially, yet these advances were swiftly countered. The success of these infiltrations relied on covert movements along tree lines under the cover of darkness, but once daylight broke, these pathways became vulnerable, turning into deadly traps. Syrski stressed a tactical preference, countering multiple smaller incursions instead of focusing on a single large attack, all while maintaining heightened fire discipline. The second critical takeaway was the value of speed in recovery. By launching swift counteractions within a day, they managed to prevent the formation of new enemy footholds. This distinctive approach maintained defensive momentum and capitalized on opportunities to press back against Russian advances. However, the situation along the Darylia front presented a harsher reality. In early August, Russian forces captured approximately 13.5 square kilometers in this region through infiltrations, which resulted in a strategically treacherous pocket of territory. This included multiple road junctions and clusters of trees scattered among open fields, creating ideal conditions for further advances. What other secrets lay hidden in the shadows of this conflict? The fast-paced operations of both sides constantly reshaped the battlefield. As tensions mounted, who would come out on top? Previously, we explored how Ukrainian forces struck in precise bursts instead of one massive salvo, targeting reinforcements and cutting off rescue attempts. This broke the enemy's momentum and extinguished pressure before it could build. Now, let's dive into what happened when the artillery suddenly fell silent. As the thunder of shells faded, Ukrainian troops surged forward in quick, daring leaps. They seized buildings and trenches in swift, tactical hops, never settling into rigid lines but forming nimble patrols and pockets of defense prepared to pull back if needed. This fluid approach shattered any hope the opposing forces had of immediately reclaiming the ground lost that day. Once the area was secured, teams moved quickly to sweep for hidden dangers, mines and improvised traps, ensuring the line stayed firm through the darkest hours. Ukrainian commander Alexander Syrski pointed out two crucial lessons from this relentless battlefield chess. First, early in the month, Russian troops managed to slip through thin gaps during the night, sneaking along tree lines and dirt paths. But with daylight came swift justice. Those very routes that concealed them became deadly corridors, trapped in carefully choreographed crossfire. Syrski explained that Ukraine preferred countering many small, precise attacks rather than one massive strike, applying unyielding fire discipline. The second lesson lay in lightning-fast recovery. Moves to secure lost ground never wasted a moment, often occurring within hours, sometimes minutes, thwarting enemy attempts to widen their hold. This speed reinforced Ukrainian control and stopped hostile footholds from growing. Syrski summarized the strategy as a matter of focus, insisting in the right place without overstretching. This balance paid off dramatically in Pocrovsk, where Ukrainian data on the ground echoed the commander's insights. Yet, the brutal reality at the Darylia front revealed even starker truths. Early August saw Russian forces carve out nearly 13.5 square kilometers, forming a pocket crisscrossed with critical road junctions and narrow strips of woodland laid between open fields. Here, infiltrations dug in deep, demanding an even fiercer Ukrainian response. What followed in Darylia would become a hard-earned lesson in battlefield resilience and tactical mastery. But could Ukraine's determined forces squeeze the invaders from this precarious pocket before it evolved into a permanent threat? More importantly, did this struggle hint at a growing shift in momentum, one that Moscow might never have anticipated? The answer would come at a cost, echoing beyond the quiet once artillery ceased. Earlier, the Ukrainian forces systematically dismantled enemy positions block by block, not street by street, swiftly securing control before reinforcements could intervene. With every ceasefire, Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles tracked potential support from the rear lines, ready to strike. This relentless vigilance forced enemy withdrawal efforts to falter, turning initial gains into lasting victories. Now, imagine trying to retrieve your wounded comrades or supply lines down a narrow, blasted access road, only to find it under constant fire. Attempts to reinforce or resupply these captured villages were repeatedly delayed. The key routes were hit relentlessly, making the ground gained on day one firmly held ground. Explosive detection teams moved in next, sweeping buildings and streets, unfurling a flexible patrol network that ensured no surprise threats lingered. This operation transformed the region's security overnight. Roads once riddled with danger became passages of relative safety. Suddenly, pockets of resistance that had previously pressed heavily were reduced to flashes of fleeting pressure, evaporating much faster than before. Yet, the enemy wasn't idle. The 7th Rapid Response Unit of Ukraine's airborne assault forces noted in grim detail something chilling, a deliberate push by opposing forces to subtly expand the gray zone near the Pocrovsk area. Picture this: under cover of darkness, small trenches are painstakingly dug, machine gun nests silently planted, and half-formed outposts creep along the terrain's edges. Their silent goal? To create tomorrow's front lines, today. If unnoticed, these quiet expansions could snowball into dangerous protrusions within just a week. But Ukraine's response is swift and surgical. Thermal sensors and miniature UAVs patrol ceaselessly by night. The enemy's new positions are marked almost immediately upon detection. By daylight, precise indirect artillery fire peppers these points, breaking construction efforts. By the third day, suppression teams sweep in, scattering enemy forces before their foothold can solidify. This painstaking daily cycle means each attempted gray zone expansion is stopped before it can grow. Attempts to fortify open terrain become glaringly obvious, and the enemy's bubbles never grow beyond fleeting dents. Every hostile incursion here is preempted, so expansion remains nothing more than a failed intention. A disturbing development emerged recently near Pocrovsk, where Russian naval infantry, normally accustomed to amphibious assaults, were deployed in mixed urban and rural terrain. These sailors-turned-foot soldiers were thrown into narrow, twisting battlefronts, hoping their initial push would break defenses. At first, they gained some ground, a shock wave pushing into Ukrainian lines. But this momentum was short-lived. Minefields lay hidden beneath the earth, while swarms of first-person view miniature drones zipped through the skies, relentless and precise. Planned artillery barrages rained down, blurring and breaking enemy advances. Armored vehicle routes, the traditional bearers of power and protection, were severely limited here. Those engineering units responsible for clearing and building paths for tanks and other vehicles quickly suffered heavy losses. Their inability to open and sustain these routes strangled the attackers' push before it could become a true threat. This fight, composed of whispered trench digging at night and the deadly ballet of drones and artillery by day, reveals a brutal truth: strategic patience and constant pressure can turn even the smallest crack in the enemy's line into a trap rather than an advantage. But the question lingers: what will the enemy try next to overcome this relentless, cold precision slicing through their every move? The plan to push forward toward the Pocrovsk-Slovensk triangle was still active. Trains rumbled along the rails, heavy trucks thundered down roads, and artillery batteries shifted to new positions, creating a tense choreography behind the front lines. Yet, despite all this movement, the key parts of the operation couldn't sync up on the battlefield. This lack of momentum turned the tide against the attackers. Without creating fire superiority, infantry advances struggled to stay protected. Waves of soldiers were left exposed far longer than they should have been. The defenders, bolstered by drones and thermal imaging, seized an upper hand that hardened the front. Once the seamless barrage of artillery fire was broken, the attackers could no longer maintain their coordinated, crushing pressure. What emerged wasn't a deep, decisive breakthrough, but rather a widening, shallow push that failed to close the door on counterattacks. As long as this delicate balance held, the gateway to the Pocrovsk triangle refused to open. Russian forces made repeated attempts to intensify control, yet their advances remained scattered and vulnerable. Recent intelligence reveals an army teetering on the edge of overstretch, nearly 700,000 soldiers stationed across the country. This bulk allows troops to shift between fronts and bring fresh reserves, but it also drags supply lines into a fragile web of bottlenecks. Every push toward Pocrovsk requires supplies to cross multiple critical nodes, each under constant watch by vigilant drones and relentless artillery strikes. Supply convoys burn in the distance, smoke curling into a gray sky, marking where the rhythm of attack falters. Even the smallest disruption tightens the noose on enemy plans. Rotating units lose vital terrain familiarity. Night missions morph into gambles under the ever-watchful eyes scanning the shadows. Fresh Russian troops stumble amid mines and traps. The weight of overwhelming numbers cannot break through the defenders' strategic timing. Here, in this deadly game of chess, rhythm, not raw force, dictates victory. This dance of firepower and timing grinds the enemy advance to a crawl. Medium-range strikes chip away at supply lines and support hubs, slowing any meaningful momentum. The front begins to feel less like a battlefield and more like a measured exchange of moves, waiting for the misstep. What surprising moves will this exhausting stalemate birth next? Can the attackers break the defenders' rhythm, or will the defenders continue turning every assault into a failed gamble? The unfolding battle is a study of frustration and precision, where every second counts and every step can decide who holds the line and who is pushed back into chaos. The tension in the conflict continues to rise as ambitious plans push towards the Pocrovsk-Slovensk triangle. A robust military machine churns with trains racing along their tracks and heavy trucks rumbling over roads, while artillery units reposition themselves like restless chess pieces poised for assault. However, amid this flurry of activity, the synchronization needed to achieve victory remains elusive. As the attackers prepare to advance, the defenders gain strength. They tap into the power of drones and thermal imaging, transforming their defensive positions into impregnable fortresses. The Russian infantry, despite their sheer numbers, find themselves vulnerable, exposed for longer than strategy permits. Without a canopy of covering fire, they become easy targets, their advances disjointed and prone to counterattacks that shatter their resolve. What seemed like a concerted offensive morphs into frustrating hiccups, a shallow push, failing to choke off the avenues for Ukrainian retaliation. Each failed attempt to seize control of the region's critical points is met with determined resistance. The momentum is disrupted as logistical nightmares plague supply lines, choking the flow of materials crucial for sustaining an offensive. With nearly 700,000 troops stationed across the region, the Russian command faces a double-edged sword. This vast army provides the flexibility to shift forces between fronts but creates an unwieldy tangle of supply routes, each moment under the watchful gaze of potentially lethal drones. As the attacker supply convoys ignite in plumes of smoke against the gray sky, the rhythm of warfare grows tenuous. Every minor disruption tightens the grip on the attacker's ambitions. Units become disoriented, unfamiliar with the terrain, undermined by the very resources designed to fortify them. Nightly endeavors turn perilous, with troops stumbling into hidden traps, and undercurrents of anxiety weave through their ranks. Here, timing emerges as a critical factor, where measured steps mean the difference between success and catastrophe. As the battle unfolds, the front blurs the line between a chaotic battlefield and a calculated game of strategy. Each skirmish is less about force and more about timing, daring to exploit missteps. Can the attackers shatter the defenders' meticulous rhythm? Or will the defenders continue to convert each aggression into another missed opportunity for the opposing side? The scenario embodies the essence of warfare, a delicate dance of calculation and precision, where a single misstep can alter the fate of many. The anticipation in the air thickens with the question, what surprising turns await in this grueling standoff? The outcome holds the weight of determination and cunning as both sides strive for dominance, knowing that victory hangs by the slimmest of threads. Previously, we saw how Russian forces managed to seize nearly 13.5 square kilometers near Derilia, carving out a fragile foothold threaded with road junctions and thin forest strips. Yet, Ukraine's response was swift and fierce, reclaiming 25.5 square kilometers soon after. This dramatic turnaround wasn't just about territory, it was about control over critical terrain that shaped the future of the conflict. The reclaimed land was more than fields or empty spaces. These areas acted like strategic nodes, linking small hills that offered vantage points and unlocking secondary supply routes crucial for movement and defense. Ukrainian troops tightened their grip from both flanks, slowly crushing that dangerous pocket of enemy forces. They systematically cleaned out the interior, establishing a fire lock along the Russian withdrawal paths. This methodical cleansing was followed by thorough sweeps and the construction of defensive outposts, creating a solid barrier where the enemy had once taken root. This two-step approach became the blueprint not only for guerrilla but also echoed in campaign maneuvers around Pocrovsk. The consequence? Early Russian gains dissolved before turning into lasting positions. Zooming out, a larger picture emerges. Over the past month, Ukraine liberated more than 58 square kilometers. This wasn't just empty territory reclaimed, it included numerous small settlements, critical road intersections, water crossings, and elevated ridges ideal for scouting enemy moves and directing fire. Commander Alexander Sirski confirmed these figures in official reports. Each piece of reclaimed land enhanced not only control but also operational capability by enabling better observation and improved firing angles. The defense line, once unstable, quickly stabilized as supply routes and logistics adapted in mere days. Despite relentless pressure, Russian forces launched a high volume of daily attacks in both regions. Yet, these offensives stalled, spreading wide but failing to break through deeper. Ukrainian defenders mastered a calculated tactic: fractures the attack into manageable parts and spring small-scale counterstrikes every time a gap appeared. The months-end statistics tell a convincing story. This patient, persistent strategy worked. Ukrainian forces repelled over 350 Russian assaults on the Pokrovsk axis alone. What does this mean for the future of the conflict? Can relentless assault without breakthrough indicate a slow but decisive shift in momentum? The battlefield whispers an answer, hidden beneath the gunpowder haze, a shift Moscow might never have foreseen. The next chapter promises even greater surprises. Could these tactical setbacks foreshadow Moscow's unraveling grip in the east? The stakes have never been higher. Previously, Ukrainian forces dismantled enemy positions block by block, not street by street, swiftly securing control before reinforcements could arrive. Every ceasefire was met with UAV patrols watching from above, ready to strike any incoming support. This constant vigilance shattered enemy attempts to regroup, turning initial territorial gains into firm control. Now, imagine trying to evacuate wounded comrades or move supplies along a narrow, blasted access road, only to find it relentlessly pounded by fire. Reinforcements struggled to reach these captured villages. Key routes were continuously hammered, ensuring that the ground taken on day one stayed firmly in Ukrainian hands. Once the front line was secured, explosive detection teams swept buildings and streets, making sure no hidden threats lingered. A flexible patrol system then took root, ready to respond to any surprise attacks. Overnight, the region's security transformed. Dangerous roads became safe passages, heavy enemy pressure fizzled out faster than ever. But the adversary was far from passive. The 7th Rapid Response Unit of Ukraine's airborne assault forces observed a chilling tactic near the Pocrovsk area. Under the cloak of night, enemy soldiers dug small trenches, planted machine gun nests, and set up rough outposts along field edges. Their silent goal was to reshape the battlefield, establishing new front lines 1 inch at a time. These quiet expansions, if undisrupted, risked ballooning into dangerous penetrations within days. Ukraine's counter was swift and precise. Thermal sensors and micro-UAVs patrolled the skies relentlessly, marking every new position almost as soon as it appeared. At first light, indirect artillery fire rained down on these sites, halting construction efforts before they matured. Within 3 days, suppression teams swept in to scatter enemy troops before their footholds could firm up. This daily cycle of detection, bombardment, and clearing ensured that each attempted gray zone expansion died before growing roots. Enemy attempts to fortify open terrain became glaringly obvious targets. Their bubbles of control remained nothing more than fragile dents in the Ukrainian line. A disturbing new chapter unfolded near Pocrovsk when Russian naval infantry, fighters normally trained for amphibious assaults, were thrust into a grueling battle across urban and rural landscapes. These sailors turned foot soldiers launched a sudden push, trying to break through tight, winding front lines. Initially, their advance sent shock waves through Ukrainian defenses. But the momentum was cruelly short-lived. Beneath the earth lay deadly minefields, invisible and waiting. Above, swarms of first-person view miniature drones darted relentlessly through the sky, tracking every movement. Artillery barrages fell like thunderstorms, massacring enemy advances and shattering their formations. Traditional armored routes, once the backbone of offensive pushes, were effectively cut off. Engineering units tasked with clearing roads for tanks and vehicles suffered severe losses. Without secure paths, the attackers' advance was choked before it could develop into a true threat. This battle, a haunting dance of whispered trench digging under cover of darkness and lethal drones and artillery pounding by day, reveals a brutal reality. Sustained pressure and relentless precision can turn even the smallest crack in the enemy line into a deadly trap. The enemy's every move is met with cold, exacting retaliation, strike after strike, minute after minute. But what comes next? If slow and steady attrition has failed, what desperate gambit will the adversary attempt to break through this impenetrable net of fire and vision? The answer remains to be seen, but one thing is clear: Ukraine's defense has transformed the battlefield into a watchful, breathing weapon.